about Rachel's talk. Let me just click OK here. And without further ado, I think we should just get into the agenda, because, as I said, it is quite jam-packed. As you, if you're new, I'll just say that we do record these meetings because there are people who can't attend and they like to catch up later. And sometimes, you know, particularly with the talk, if it's something that you want to revisit and go over it, you know, a bit slower, or like reconsider some of the points that are made in the talk, it is really, really useful to have a recording available. So I'm going to hand over now to Brenda to give us some news about the Intergen.
Okay, yeah, we're making really good progress, actually. It seemed to sort of slow down for a while, but things are happening. And the really, really interesting thing is that we are forging links with one university for sure, mainly Heriot-Watt, just outside of Edinburgh. We had Ryan Woolrich from there as a speaker earlier this year, if you remember. And he's very, very keen to work with us. He's got various funding bids in at present, and if he's looking for older people, we will be his first port of call for people to take part in that that we have. If you have a look on the website, our own website, and click on Intergenerational Matters, you will see on there the most recent version of an article that the group has written about the adverse effects of mainly overly hot weather on older people, and interestingly on older women in particular, who find you know, temperature regulation even more of a problem. We have waived this at our magazine, who have not yet shown interest in publishing it. They might, but you can read it in the meantime and share it with your own U3A if you wish. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Mary?
Yes, we've been looking at the membership basically, and sort of I think we've indicated before that sort of, you know, not everybody can get here every month, and we know that. But the U3A tends to have a view that if people don't come for more than 3 months, do they, you know, should they just be dropped out of groups? And our way, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Jenny and Ellie, the way we normally do this is we at least contact them and ask if everything's okay and so on. And if people can't actually make the meeting but want to be a member of the group and listen to the recordings and so on, it's just good to know, because I put that on the register as well. And then we don't sort of, at least we know who's really interested in the work we're doing. So, for example, at the moment, we've got 11 members who've never come to a meeting. We've got 86 in total in the group that I've got at the moment. 11 have never attended, and we've got another 11 who haven't attended for the last 3 months. So I guess we were trying to find out views on whether, you know, how people feel about, should we just drop those people out of the group or not? Because that's a total of 22 members. Is that fair, Ellie, Jenny?
Yes, I think so. I think if we get in touch with them and find out, you know,
Yeah.
if there's a genuine reason that they just can't make Fridays, but they want to have access to the recordings, that's fair enough, isn't it?
I mean, the other thing I've done is when people have been sending me apologies, I've just reminded them that there is a recording in case they'd forgotten or weren't aware.
That's great, Mary. Thank you. Catherine?
When Teresa puts the recording up, I always send out an email to people as well. And I do know that one of those people who's never been has booked to come to summer school. So there's like a clear intent there to be engaged with us.
Which is great, yeah.
Yeah, it is good. Thank you, Ellie. Catherine?
I just thought that you would like a bit of a follow-up to Julian Morm's talk last time, which didn't quite cover some of the things that we would have liked him to cover, but he talked about dark money. So I just thought I would read out part of an email that's come from them. Fair Civil Justice is a campaign that says it wants to protect consumers from lawyers, but it's actually funded by dark money and wants to stop big businesses getting sued when they mess up. So it's the opposite of what it sounds like. We found out that Fair Civil Justice was set up by an arm of the US Chamber of Commerce. And it's funded to lobby against the government introducing US-style class action. So I just thought that was a bit of information about what he meant by dark money last time. And actually this whole business of organizations such as that one in Tufton Street calls itself a charity and therefore can benefit from government money is actually totally inappropriate. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Catherine. Back to you, Brenda.
It's all happening, isn't it? Right, so this is just a really, really short, quick hang on, PowerPoint of our little trip to London, which was just lovely. Hang on, I'm struggling here. I'm not good at this. Here we go. So we went to the Camley Street Natural Park there, which is tucked in the back of St Pancras and King's Cross railway stations. It was actually a former coal yard, which I thought there was a certain, there was a nice thing there, but there we were as an environmental group.
Brenda, if you click on from the beginning, we'll just get the actual slide that you're talking about.
Sorry.
Should do.
Yep. So this was
working. Never mind.
I don't think it is. So it was set up by a group of people as a sort of land reclamation, and there's a lovely little cafe there. And Catherine very wisely thought it was a good place for us to meet. So here are some of us having a coffee on arrival, joined of course by Bella the umbrella.
Brenda, we can only see the gate. We can only see slide 1 in large.
Yeah. Let me go back to that. Can you see Bella now?
Yeah.
So yeah. No activity is right without her. So she came along with, she's staying with Jenny at present. She says,
I have become her adopted mother. It's such a privilege.
My goodness, so here we are all having a good chat, and a cup of coffee and catching up. It's just so nice to have these opportunities to see each other in person, and not just peering down a Zoom lens, and with one or two guests with us. Clive and Beverly were just on their way to do some action outside the High Court that day because the Just Stop Oil activists were, we thought, going to be sentenced, but in fact that never actually happened. So we all had a good catch up, and then we had a wander around this beautiful space actually, which has a pond in the middle. They've got volunteer people who come and look after it, and we had lunch and talked and walked, and I'm just going to show you the last slide, which is called Spot the Squirrel.
Oh.
If you could compare it, the middle of the photograph was dangling upside down in a tree, and we had a lovely time. So for those of you who weren't able to come, let's hope that next time we have a similar event somewhere else in the country, we'll get a few more of you along. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Yes, it was great, wasn't it? Ellie, summer school.
Right, just good news that we're definitely going ahead. We're booking it all, paying for it now. I'm waiting for one more payment, and the person knows who it is. We are still allowed at the moment to take any further bookings. So if anybody else is thinking about it or knows somebody who is a U3A member who might like to come, that's still okay. But obviously, if the university fills up, that they might just refuse an extra one at some stage. but it's very exciting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. And we're part way through planning a really fantastic programme. Next, just a plug for John Baxter, our National U3A Subject Advisor. He does a really excellent monthly newsletter. If you don't get this, I really recommend it to you. I've just put his address in the chat. His email address is Second Nature. And when I originally asked him where that had come from, he said, because it should be second nature to do what's good for the environment, you know, the climate, the world and stuff like that. But I do really recommend his newsletter. It's full of really good hardcore information. He's got some humour. He's got good links. It costs you nothing. So that's the plug for the newsletter. Now I'm going to hand over to Ian to give us an update on all the news that's going on everywhere. Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Just get the news up. Right, so there's been quite a lot of news this month. I'll go into slideshow. It's a lot better. Start at the top.
Yeah, we've got it.
Okay, yeah. So there was previous, yeah. There's announced yeah. There was announcement yesterday that we're heading for 3.1 degrees centigrade. The official view has always been 2.9 degrees by the end of the century. So I expect they've hyped that number up slightly because we're coming into the COPs. But it's also true that the mitigation actions, the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy is simply too slow. So it wouldn't surprise me if it really has gone up to 3.1 degrees projected by the end of the century, which is fairly catastrophic if you look at the maps. So something definitely needs to change there. I think they basically hyped up the message because we're coming into the COPs. You know, put pressure on the participants to actually improve the mitigation. UK has announced this carbon capture and storage a couple of weeks ago, which is part of the battle. It's basically absorbing the carbon before it goes into the atmosphere, looking at industries capturing the carbon and burying it underground. So funding has been agreed. They pledged £21 billion has been pledged. And they're also hoping to get some £8 billion of industry money as well. So that'll be rolled out over the next several years. It's kind of a big landmark project for the government, but it's really only part of the solution. And I mean, arguably, money spent on home insulation might be better spent, but nevertheless, it's a flagship project which the government is going ahead with. They're also opening up some new UK pump storage stations in England and Scotland with renewable energy. When the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining, you do need to store the energy. So pump storage is part of that story. So that's very important. So that's good. And there's some news from China. China's still mining an awful lot of coal. And they've come up with sort of, I don't know what you call it, an excuse, a sort of rationale that basically they're going to they're going to somehow clean up the process of using the coal. So presumably by extracting the gases at source. But I don't think anybody really believes that. So I was a bit disappointed, to see that. Although China is doing a lot on renewable energy, a huge amount, they're also mining coal, which doesn't seem to have gone away, unfortunately. Okay, go on to the next one. So the renewable energy capacity around the world, the International Energy Agency, there's a doubling of renewable energy expected by 2030. which is a bit less than the expectation, which was going to be 3 times by 2030. Nevertheless, it's moving in the right direction. It just needs to go faster, basically. And one of the problems is the grid systems, for moving the power from where it's produced, to where it's used. And pretty much the grid system across the world in every country needs to be upgraded, including the UK. It's just inadequate. So expenditure on national grids was a sort of key message there. Antarctic greening. Satellite data shows that the land area of the Antarctic Peninsula covered in vegetation has increased from 0.8 square kilometers in 1986 to nearly 12 kilometers now. So it's gone up by about an order of magnitude. So the edges of the Antarctic are getting slightly greener with climate change. And the rate at which the vegetation is growing is also increasing. So, in 50 years, you'd be able to see green areas pretty much around the edge of Antarctica. It's gradually greening, which is not a surprise. There was a survey of the world's rivers by the World Meteorological Organization, found that they were suffering from a lack of water, especially, United States, America, pretty much everywhere. The river flow is reducing, except that occasionally you get a sort of a downpour and sort of sudden floods because we're getting more extreme weather. But that pretty much goes straight out into the sea and is not captured. So the extreme weather means that the waters are seeing less. The rivers are seeing less water flow. Southeast Asia is investing in clean energy. The message here is that Southeast Asia needs to invest a lot more in clean energy. Something like 5 times the current level of investment to meet their climate goals. So Southeast Asia needs to do more in that area. Global wildlife populations. Global wildlife, they've actually fallen. I was quite surprised by this, by 73% over the last 50 years. Now, this is reported by the World Wildlife Fund. Certainly, freshwater populations have fallen by 85%, terrestrial 69%, marine 56%. I was quite surprised that figure is so high. It's quite a scary figure. Now, obviously, that's partially due to climate change and partially due to pollution and the fact that we are encroaching on these natural areas. So that is quite high, and that needs to be stopped. So there is a COP going on now, COP15 in South America, looking at the biodiversity conference, which will be examining that issue. Meanwhile, permanent species loss is running at about 1.5 to 2.5% since industrialization, but that is projected to increase to about 10 to 15% by the end of the century. Global forest fires, fires in Russia, North America, having 3 times as many fires in the last 20 years. The number of forest fires is about 3 times, which is obviously mainly due to global warming. So they are trying to find ways of fighting them, recognize them early using drone systems, that sort of thing. So we are starting to fight back on forest fires, but they are getting a lot worse at the moment. UK food security, we had our harvest for the last 2 years has been quite poor, partially due to the winter flooding, which just flooded the land, so it couldn't then be used. The overall harvest fell by about 15% last year, so or certainly over the last 5 years. So that's something we need to look at. There's some slightly good news. China, which runs most of the sort of shipping, moving cargo, most of the ships are Chinese, 70% of them around the world. They've been asking the owners to monitor their carbon emissions. This is because the EU has insisted that they do so. So since they're exporting to the EU, they've been asking their captains to actually monitor the CO2 usage, so that's beginning to happen. So that is a good piece of news. The China wind turbines are getting bigger and bigger. They got a really big one, 20 megawatts wind turbine is the biggest one. It's a lot bigger than what we've got in the North Sea. So that so China's doing the right thing in terms of wind power. Also, China accounted for about 60% of renewable installations last year. So China does everything on a big scale. They do good things and they do bad things like using coal. So everything's big basically, but they are moving in the right direction. And they claim that they'll reach net zero by 2060. Okay, so that's good. And if any country can make it happen, China can, because everything's so heavily regulated. There was articles recently about UK waste incinerators producing massive amounts of CO2, similar to what coal used to do. So that was a headline a couple of weeks ago, and depends how the waste is burned. So if it's burnt, without air, then it's okay. But there's an awful lot of these incinerators have really multiplied, rather than going to landfill, and they're just pumping CO2. My understanding is pumping it straight into the air. So something needs to happen with that. So that's been highlighted as a problem area which the government needs to look at. Global solar power growth is the fastest growing renewable energy is solar power. And by 2033, estimated it will be the biggest source of energy. Not so much in the UK, because we're mainly sort of wind power and we don't get that much. But certainly globally, solar power is probably the long-term solution. And I think if we can move it around the planet, from the Sahara Desert, for example, that would be a very good thing to do. And then just the last one, tropical diseases in Europe are, because Europe's getting hotter, we are seeing more of these big tropical diseases beginning to move into Europe. So this has now been picked up by the medical system. So Glasgow University is part of a consortium of medical schools, which are now looking at tropical diseases. Liverpool's always been on top of this because of having a port area, but it's now recognised that these diseases are coming into the UK, and so there'll be hopefully some sort of action by the government, going forward. US carbon emissions, the Biden administration is now regulating these as fast as it can before the election. It's moving everything as fast as it possibly can, because Trump is basically going to reverse almost everything. So hopefully Biden wins, that's my view. So they put in some regulation to regulate emissions from coal and gas-fired power stations, which now have to be monitored and regulated in the US. So that was a good piece of news. Data center power plants, artificial intelligence is raising the demand for energy. 2.5% of UK energy comes from data centers. AI is expected to increase that figure to 10-15% over the next 20 years or so. So some of these data centers are moving towards small modular nuclear reactors, to power the data centers, which I think that's fine. It doesn't emit carbon, but you've still got the problem of what to do with the nuclear waste. But anyway, that's the sort of ongoing trend, power, to generate the AI. And lastly, green project, grid connections. Yes, so it used to be a first come, first serve. There's a big waiting list to connect to the national grid. And some of our big power generators, have just been told to wait because they can't get connected to it. So they've that process so that if you're ready to go, you will get connected a lot quicker. But it doesn't get around the basic problem that the UK grid needs some very, very serious modernisation. Oh, just one more. There is the COP16 biodiversity conference is underway. I've been on one or two Zoom calls looking at it. 23,000 people, biodiversity loss, and what they're trying to do, what they did at the last COP was to put in a framework structure for increasing the biodiversity around the planet. So this COP that's going on now is called an implementation COP. It's about producing some actual plans, to roll out across the world to increase the biodiversity. And the idea is to protect 30% of the Earth's land and ocean systems by 2030. That is an ambitious target. May or may not be achieved, but at least it's a really good target. COP29 kicks off in a couple of weeks' time, so I'll be following that in detail. I'll give you an update on that. So it's really about getting the countries to declare more ambitious targets or NDCs for reducing their carbon emissions. That's really what it's about. Because they give a target and then they pretty much ignore it, which has been happening the last few years. So it's about putting more pressure on countries to increase their mitigation. So I'll follow that in some detail. There's a worrying decline in the land carbon sink. As you know, the land absorbs carbon. The forests absorb carbon, but that seems to have slowed down considerably. It's about half what it used to be since they started taking measurements. And some forests are actually emitting CO2. That is because they're getting hotter and the ground that they're sitting on is getting drier. So that's a worrying trend. Most of the CO2 is still absorbed in the sea, but it can only absorb so much before it starts to get acidified on the surface layers. And I think this is the last one. UK National Grid Planning. So the energy ministers have asked the national grid operator to produce a strategy for growing the national grid. This was announced a couple of days ago. They produce a plan, some maps, a rollout program. It's a massive program to upgrade, but I saw that as a very positive thing, as long as they respond to that. And that's it. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Ian. That was really jam-packed. Anne, is this a very quick question? Because
It is, yeah. It's just something that touches on several things. In Merseyside, that now there's that's back to front, isn't it? It's the Mersey Tidal Power project, which is hoping to vastly increase our renewable energy by building a barrage across the River Mersey. It's very early stages. It's planned to operate in 2038, but it's a massive project and would be like the biggest source of renewable energy in the country. 1 gigawatt.
Thank you. Yeah. And you can keep us updated on that. Now, we often we have time for a few questions here, but because we want to get straight on to Rachel's talk, we won't have any questions. But if there's something really burning that you want to discuss with Ian, you can always send him an email or you put it in the chat. So, Rachel, Ellie, is Rachel co-host? Yeah, so you can screen share. Now, just a minute, Rachel. Reading through your resume, I was feeling quite overwhelmed. Oh my word. Rachel has got a PhD in soil microbiology. She's had a postdoctoral career in environmental sensing and building materials to do with conservation research. She's co-founded a startup offshore and marine sensing organization with technologies. She's gone back into academia. She's the business development manager for a company called Census, which does amazing work about developing and sensing imaging technologies to do with monitoring farming and the impact on soil and soil microbiology. And I have to admit, Rachel, when I was looking up some of this yesterday, I was just thinking, oh my word, what is all of this going on? I'm so excited to listen to your talk. So we're handing over to Rachel now. Please don't put stuff in the chat while Rachel is giving her presentation. It's just so distracting. Yesterday, I attended a talk given by Brenda, and there were people putting stuff in the chat all the time. I was getting really frustrated with them. So, Rachel, thank you so much for sharing your time with us here today. Over to you.
I'm delighted. I'm 60 next year, and I was shout out to my friend Terry Joyner in Straven, who who I found out about you, and I said, "Can I join? Can I join you three?" And she's going, "You have to be actually retired, Rachel."
No, you don't. You don't.
Yes,
it's a myth.
really.
You don't have to be retired.
Desperate to retire, but can't quite afford it yet. I'm just about to share my screen, so
Thank you.
hopefully it'll all work out. I think that looks like the one. What's that looking like?
It's coming. Yes, we're there.
That looking good?
Yeah.
Great. So, well, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for that resume. It's just me trucking on. It sounds grander than it is actually, but I think just in the context of this, we are an organisation that's 10 years old. We were funded by the Scottish Government initially, based in Glasgow University. We're a team of 18 people, all techie people. And our job there with the Scottish Government was to drive adoption, early adoption of Internet of Things technologies, really. And we're actually stepping out of the university in February to stand on our own 2 feet as a research technology organisation. We get a lot of work through ScotGov, but with my background, it's really just the last 2 or 3 years that people have been talking to us about climate impact, sensing the environment, biodiversity tracking, soil health, agri-tech, all these kind of things. So I've had a lot of really brilliant projects coming onto my desk now, working with some really interesting organisations. So I'm also a trustee at Climate Action Straven in South Lanarkshire. We focus really on active travel and community transport and home insulation, but it was through CAS that I met Terry, and then that's why I'm here. But so really what I'm going to run through today, hopefully within 20 minutes, is just really a snapshot of the kind of things that I've been involved in, or am involved in, or know about, that and I've picked these that I think hopefully are going to be of interest, and happy to answer any questions as well at the end. So the next slide here is really what I'm going to talk about. So the two topics, really, the main ones: carbon positive farm and Hydroglen, run by the James Hutton Institute. So I'll describe that and why I've selected it when we get onto those couple of slides. And then we're going to talk about data not date and trends in dairy. Part of my week is spent on a dairy project, dairy sector project, and obviously dairy has a lot of challenges, so I thought that would be interesting, and that's all linked to soil. And then if we've got time, which we might not have, is just to touch on rural communities, flooding and nature-based solution implementation as well, and farmers. I just saw an announcement today with DEFRA and some other organisations trying to bring farmers, collectively into the nature-based solution headspace and what they can do for land management. So then this topic really is the James Hutton carbon positive farm. So James Hutton is a research technology organisation. I don't know if any of you ever heard of it before, but it started out decades ago as the Macaulay Land Use Research Institute, spread between Dundee and Aberdeen, and one to watch, really. as a young researcher doing soil in Aberdeen, we had a lot of involvement with James Hutton. So James Hutton now have kind of focusing really now on climate impact. And so they do a lot of, and they've got a lot, they run farms as well. So they do a lot of their research is farm based. So this snapshot here is of one of their farms at Glensock. So 70% of farming in Scotland is upland, and that's what it looks like. So a lot of natural foraging for livestock, a lot of land to manage, and a lot of grazing and a lot of peatlands. So this is fairly typical of the economics, farming economics in Scotland. And so the farm at Glensock is aiming to do a number of things really, yeah, so they're really focused on demonstrating results on the ground and then using that to drive policy with the government and bring farmers with them as well, and try and provide that evidence-based, data-driven change for UK agriculture. So the next slide is really looking a little bit closer at what they do at Glensock. So really they're looking at spatial modelling a land use. So what that means really is understanding where habitats start and stop, and really using Earth observation data to try and join those habitats together and try and understand how those habitats are changing with climate. They also are looking at woodland and agroforestry. They've got, I think, the most mature agroforestry kind of project or land going on in the UK. So that's grazing in with trees, but also looking at below ground and how the biodiversity and ecology of both above and below ground change when you've got roots growing. That image at the bottom amongst the heather, that's a project that was started in 2005, and that's looking at how land changes in context of the climate as well when you start to grow trees in heathland like this, and also how much carbon's stored, and really the dynamics that go on under the ground as well as above the grazing. There's some grazing pressure and there's some without grazing pressure. So it's really that kind of big idea kind of research that they do there. They're looking at a lot of bio-based technologies, plastic, bioplastics, etc., to reduce plastics on the farm. And they're managing nutrient recovery from wastewater sources. They're looking at novel composting and waste cycling, all to try and make this farming program here climate positive, and then trying to get the data to evidence that. They're looking at rotational pasture grazing systems and sward compositions. So that's the different foraging plants on the ground, and I've got more to say about that later. And also bringing the community about recreational activities in this improved landscape. What do they look like? And then, and for me, my link to them is sensing on the ground of all these, providing that evidence of change. But the main thing link here into what the other part of the title was called Hydroglen is that they've got a massive renewables element to this. So it's all about energy storage, generating energy storage, all different types. But one of the main drivers really for them is to evidence green hydrogen production on farm. So can farms produce green hydrogen? And what does that look like when they do? So this little diagram on the left, it's a bit complicated, but essentially it just shows on the left the different renewable energy sources, how some of that's going into the national grid and how some of that is going into storage as batteries. But they're also showing how they can generate green hydrogen through electrolysis and how that hydrogen is stored. And ultimately, they want to be able to fuel vehicles, hydrogen vehicles through that, farm vehicles, and also generate electricity through the fuel cells in there as well. So this is a build project, so it'll finish being built by next year, and it's been funded mainly through the Scottish Government's Just Transition Fund and the Scottish Government Community Renewable Energy Scheme called CARES. So that's how it's been funded, but it's got UK wide. The really interesting thing to me about this as well is that whole hydrogen generation thing. So most of the communities in these rural areas in Scotland uplands, have oil tanks for fuel. And so what this is, part of this is an experiment of how can a local economy change when you transition from oil to hydrogen? What does that look like? Can local community generate revenue through these relationships with the farms? And can they be almost an off-grid kind of communities around farms that are producing green hydrogen? So that's what that project looks like. So when the build's finished, it'll be one to watch, and hopefully, if it's successful, will be modelled, in places around the UK, particularly rural areas. So that's really interesting. That's Hydroglen, and loads and loads of information on the net about that. So the second one really I want to talk about is this title, Data Not Date, and Trends in Dairy. So that really links to the things that I've picked up from the dairy project. So this is meanwhile in commercial farming kind of thing, and all the pressures that commercial farmers are under about land management, the slurry spreading rules, the transition to regenerative farming and the pressures there. And then as a soil scientist, it's so shocked me to learn that we're losing soil in the UK through wind and also obviously rain, but wind particularly, because that means the soil structures just collapsed. If you're losing, you think of the Dust Bowls of America that I learned about when I was at school. That's what's happening. And it's so shocking to me. Yes, so you can tell I'm shocked. Look at me shocked. So and the fact that it's a global thing, and soils are one of our biggest sinks of carbon, and then and they're not being looked after, and it takes 100 years to grow to generate 1 centimetre of topsoil. So it's not really a easily renewable resource either. So there's all these pressures, and farmers are looking to get out of that high input, high yield commodity agriculture, as it says in one of the headlines there. And I understand that from farmers, including dairy farmers. They don't want to, intensively produce milk. It's not good for the animals. They see a lot of mastitis, etc. So anything that can help change that. But it's all about money. It's about how can they finance that transition without losing money, and who's going to fund that transition, etc. So it's a kind of a dynamic state at the moment. But Data Not Date and the trends in dairy. So this project is one of 11 projects in the government called Strength in Places, as Boris called it, levelling up. And they focus on economic weak areas in the UK which need an economic boost for their supply chains. So this area is Cumbria and Southwest Scotland dairy chain. A lot of value goes out of the region. A lot of the value added to the milk is made outside the region. There's very few technology companies there, and the digital transition is just not happening. Why do we need digital transition in supply chains? Well, it's a key to being low carbon, being able to monitor things, being able to understand where your emissions are, etc., but also maintaining competitiveness as well. So that's the Digital Dairy Project, and there are lots and lots of different programs within that. But going on to the next slide really is just some observations that I've picked up. So this image at the top there is, I don't know if you notice, you might not notice this, but it's one example of a trend that's going now. So the dairies, which most, unless it's an independent organic farm, but dairies have hundreds of farms within their network, and each farm has a contract. So it's really the dairies are now charged with ensuring the farms become more sustainable and carbon positive. And in that, many of the dairies now are incentivizing farms, and they're looking for milk with a higher fat and protein content, because that's where the value's added, because that kind of milk quality gives you all of your gelata and your yogurts and your skyr and your good artisan cheeses, etc. If your milk's not that high value, then it's just for drinking or making into powder, etc., and other dairy products that are mass produced. So really, the dairies do want high quality fat and protein, and you get the highest quality fat and protein when you grass feed. So they can make more diverse products, and it means that the animals being outside most of the year. So some dairies I know have accepted a half of the milk yield that they would normally have from the farm in lieu of having something more higher quality, and the animals having demonstrable better lives. So the whole trend in this is that towards smaller cows now. So these cows up there are from a farm I visited on two Mondays ago, and these are dairy, Jersey. What are the black and white ones called? Jersey Friesian cross. They're smaller cows. So smaller cows, that's the whole trend. You might see it coming out in farms all over the UK. Not these huge big Holstein breeds are kind of being phased out, and smaller ones are coming in because they're hardier. They convert the nutrients from grass better because of them being out longer, and they produce less methane as well. And there's a whole area in methane emissions because dairy is one of the biggest mass emitters, and it's the livestock that emits the methane in dairy. So these are cows that are coming in for a snack. So they're having their silage, and they'll be out back in the field again after they've had that snack. And this farm runs a rotational grazing. So the cows don't need as much supplement as they would if they were a Holstein or a Friesian. They enjoy the silage and they go out again. But that puts impacts on pasture management in a number of ways that links into the soil. So this is another area of change. It's fast adoption of herbal lays. So you think of grazing and you think of grass, but really what gives that diverse, good quality milk is herbal lays. Lots and lots of what we would call weeds. Lots of different types of plants have got lots of different advantages. And people are starting to look at these now for sheep and for cows. They're better for the soil. You can see the different root lengths here, give the soil a better structure. You've got that whole microbial community being enhanced by these deep roots. And you've got some of the roots are going to be nitrogen fixing as well. And it's better for biodiversity. And also the cows enjoy the foraging. It gives them because they do decide what they want to eat on a hour to hour basis. So it gives them more interest when they're grazing and the well-being. But also it's some of these, it's in research just now, but some of these herbal lays do reduce methane in the gut as well. So that's a big area of interest for farming. And so you get this soil health improvement, so you've got your herbal lays. Interesting to hear as well from another project, the perspective from buried archaeology. They don't like the herbal lay idea because they've got the deep roots. So that's a whole other area research has opened up, is do herbal lays damage buried archaeology for English heritage, etc. So there's so many facets to this whole regenerative farming and climate positive farming trend. So some of the challenges, as you can imagine, having cows and hoofed animals out all the way, you look at the poaching, that's where your soil degradation starts. So this soil's not going to recover anytime soon. and below that is a thin soil. That's where grass is struggling to grow, because its structures is just very, very friable. And in this actual photograph is from a soil that has suffered years and years of windblown loss down in south of Yorkshire that I visited as well. So so you've got the challenges in managing that kind of out most of the year dairy and beef as well, poaching leading to impaction leading to erosion, and maintaining the lay mix. So you get a lot of docks coming in, and they're not good for any animal. So it's a whole manual labour, or trying to lasers and spot chemicals trying to remove the dock leaves as well. So that's an interest. And another just an anecdote there about soil loss. I had a meeting with National Farmers Union Scotland a couple of months ago. It was about water abstraction from rivers and how to monitor that and manage water on the farm. And a farmer there said, I've got 10 miles, my state's across 10 miles up in the north of Scotland. He said, I grow carrots. He said, last month I lost 10 acres of soil, took the carrots with them. He said, and what the problem with that is, it highlighted to him that their contracts with supermarkets do not include the impact of climate change on being able to deliver their quota to the supermarkets. So he gets penalised because his soil's washed away. And then that came a whole discussion about, well, you know, how do you monitor the rainfall? And that's a whole other issue about the accuracy of the rain gauge network in the UK. So nearly at the end, coming to the end. So this comes on to the data not date question. So it's really better understanding the impact of interventions. So, and adopting a holistic approach to soil health. So this picture there is a state-of-the-art slurry spreader. So obviously when the cows are out in the field most, they'll be pooping in the field, and you get sort of less silage produced on the farm, but silage does still need to be spread, and it's spread to provide nutrients for crops like silage that then get cut and then fed back. So this is a state of the art. It's making sure that the silage isn't spread and aerosoled. It's going directly into the soil. And that really comes back to the whole soil structure and soil health. So, you know, silage should stay in the soil. The soil should be receptive to that conditioning treatment. If it's not, then the silage goes elsewhere into the water, and that's where we get the pollution, which is pretty rife at the moment, and slurry spreading is a big contributor of that. The image at the bottom is a newly started up company, and what they're doing is they're looking at, again, Earth observation data to tell farms where they should and shouldn't spread. So this is all to do with where the water courses are, the topography of the soil as well, where it's likely to run off. And then what they want to do as well is then have on the ground information on to the farmer to say, that soil is saturated, don't spread, or that soil's too dry, don't spread. You know, and its nutrient status as well. It's you know, it won't be able to take up the nutrient. So that's where this kind of area technology is going, is that informing better use of conditioners like this, so that they don't end up in our what is 40 plus years of legacy. We've got all over the UK of phosphate in waters, 40 years to clean that up, pretty much. So it's really looking at a holistic approach as well to soil health and all aspects. And this next slide is really talking about the you know, the soil structure. And you know, if you take a spade and you dig up a clump of soil, arable soil at the top, a mineral soil, you should see it clings together really well. It smells good. Humans have a really good olfactory genetic ability to smell the scent of soil. I learned a few weeks ago just by reading something. And so we're very, very attuned to how soil smells. And it's surprising that in some fields you can dig and you don't smell very much at all. And you wouldn't think, oh, but it's actually, you should smell that rich loamy that is an indication of health. You should see pores and cracks because that's how water drains well. Soil enables the water to drain away. And you shouldn't really see zones of impaction like it's got here on the slide. But land management really comes down to optimizing the dynamics between soil and water. So a good soil should be able to hold water. It should be able to drain the water freely when it's high rainfall with no loss. It should be able to hold the water better when there's water scarce. So, and you can only do that if you've got that right balance of organic matter and minerals and a really healthy root and microbial community there. And that's what's happening. We're relying, and in that structure, then the soil can provide enough nutrients for the plants because it's got lots of sites it can hold onto the nutrients. If you start breaking down that structure, the soil can't offer the nutrients to the plants, which need to be dissolved in the water that goes up into the roots. If it can't hold the water, then it just begins to break down, and that's what we're seeing as well. Poaching by hooves, overuse of fertilizers, just that, and that's what we're facing now in the UK. The picture at the bottom is a peat soil. They need to stay wet, as you probably know. The spongy surface at the top allows the vegetation to remain covered. But again, losses in peats, drying through drainage, drying through loss of crop cover. Well, not crop, but foliage at the top. And they become mass emitters, but they've evolved to be saturated, and they need to be kept an eye on as well. And obviously, you probably know there's a massive programme in Scotland and in England on restoring peatlands for that reason, so they don't become mass emitters. But really, it's about the dynamics between soil and water, and fundamentally, maintaining the soil structure and changing practices so that the soil structure is maintained. I don't know how I'm doing for time, but that's is that 20 minutes?
Ish, we're fine.
Because I can go on about the Newcastleton flood community if you want. I've got another couple of slides if there's interest.
Yes, I think so. I think that would be really interesting.
Okay, so this is again loosely connected to soil. So I don't know if any of you are aware of Newcastleton. It's a tourist town in the Borders, very picturesque, middle of nowhere, surrounded by hills, lots of farming, and they've suffered up to £16 million of damage through flooding between 2020 and 2021. And and there's a lot of well-being impact there. Families are leaving. People have had homes flooded twice, so it's a big thing. So the Newcastleton District and Community Trust started up, and they bought a lot of the land. So a lot of the land around the area is owned by Buccleuch Estates. Some of it's been sold to a company called Oxygen Conservation, which is a green economics company and selling carbon, and the rest of it is owned between forestry, the community, and some other the farmers around who are part of the community. So they all got together and said, we've had enough of this flooding. What can we do to try and change how our flooding can be managed? So we came in as part of a stakeholder group as well, and I learned so much from this. So we had some hydrologists come in, and three areas they were looking at really was measuring the rain, measuring how much water's in the contributors into the main river that goes through the town, and then looking at areas where there can be some nature-based solutions built that slow up the water before it reaches the river to allow the river time to get rid of the excess water and therefore not flooding. And so we've done several field trips and field surveys. But what I was shocked to learn was that in the UK in general, that the rain gauge network in the UK is wholly inadequate. There's not only is there not enough rain gauges to tell us how much rain is falling, but they're not in the right areas. The right areas are the top of hills where the rain first falls, because that's when you start to, obviously then it drains into the contributors. And who owns most of the hilltops? It's farms. So the reason why they're not on hilltops is because they're difficult to access and massively difficult to maintain for a government organisation such as, SEPA, Scottish, the Environmental Agency, etc. They're just really difficult to maintain, and that's why it's inadequate. Not only that, but there's high winds in these areas, and so you need a very special kind of rain gauge that tends to be more accurate than not in these high wind situations. So that was the first thing I learned, was really we've got an inadequate rain gauge network, and that impacts on how our environmental agencies predict where flooding is going to happen. And that's why you get surprise floods in areas where they're maybe geared up down the road to receive loads of water, and it actually impacts on another town or another area, slightly away from there. So the emergency services can't get there in time. And I mean, I'm not a hydrogeologist, and I'm sure it's lots and lots of nuances about this, but as a Joe Street on this was my understanding that it's fundamentally about the rain, measuring the rain accurately. So this project at Newcastleton, really, the farmers are engaged. So we went around and we've identified three areas to monitor. And what we're monitoring is hilltop rainfall, and then how much water volume is in the river, subsequently. And that will allow us to measure the time it takes between the rainfall event and then how quickly the rivers change. And another thing I learned was that when you're looking for sites to monitor, you need to go for sites that change quickly when it rains. So suddenly the stream's up, so you're looking at very, very dynamic sites, and that begins to feed into that risk alert and how long you've got between being able to mitigate the impact. So these three sites are also sites where that have been identified as potentially being nature-based solution building. So these are things like just scooping out, I say just because it's the farmer's land, but scooping out an area that's allowed to flood periodically. So once we start getting the data flow, the sensors are going in next month. Once we start getting the data flow, and that'll be real-time data coming out, when we build the nature-based solution around there with the farms, then we'll be able to show that these are the right sites to have these NBS built. Another aspect is the community, not the community council, sorry, the local council, Borders Council, want to start throwing money at Newcastleton to build flood defences in the town. So the Newcastleton community is saying, we don't want flood defences because we're a tourist town. They're going to look ugly. It needs to be tackled at source. And this is, can we spend this, instead of spending loads of money on a defence, can we not spend it on supporting the farms to build and maintain these nature-based solution projects? So that this is I won't say the user expert, but it's a pilot to really show how rural communities can get together and use these learnings and skills to start their own, mitigation of flooding. And in my view, it's only communities can do it because it's too big a job, I think, and too expensive for the environmental agencies. And the other thing as well is Earth. I've showed you some examples of how Earth observation sciences are being used to give that holistic approach on climate change impact, etc., on land. But Earth observation services are hungry for data coming off the ground, and we haven't really got those huge big sensor networks. So communities could become a source of very high quality terrestrial data they can sell multiple times over to Earth observation services and other organisations. And so it could be a source of really, really good income for you know, at the same time as ensuring that our terrestrial data, you know, related to climate change, biodiversity, etc., is looked after locally by local organisations who get a benefit from selling that good quality data that we really desperately need. So that's really all she said, really, and that's just the last wee slide that's showing one of the NBS areas and how floodable it would be. And I think that's me over and out.
Thank you, Rachel. And I think it was good to have that more sort of like localized bit added on at the end, you know, after all the theory and stuff. So thank you for that. Now we're going to go into breakout rooms just for a short time, and we haven't got any specific questions. If in your breakout room, if you can just briefly discuss, you know, what stood out for you, what you're going to take away from this, and then we'll come back and put a few things in the chat as usual and round it all up. So thank you very much, Rachel. You've given us lots of food for thought there.
Do I go away now, or am I in a breakout room?
Are you okay to stay? If you'd like to put any comments in the chat, because even if we haven't got time to discuss them now, you can save the chat, you know, and have a look at it later. It says here, Rachel, can you explain your term poaching?
It's a soil science term. It's a term that's used to describe how soil gets impacted by hooves of animals. And you see the little dints in it, and it just gets mashed up, and the structure just is destroyed. It's called poaching.
Rachel, in my group, we were wondering to what extent how the average small farmer is coping, you know, with all this technology.
I think my understanding, because I'm not an expert in that particular, you know, the whole dynamics and economics of farming, but I think small farms are struggling. You know, particularly in Scotland, the majority are small farms. I know in the Highlands and Islands, there are many farms that are just closing down because they can't afford to manage and make ends meet. So it is a bit of a crisis. Many small, you know, small families. And perhaps it's just one person that manages the farm, and if that person becomes ill, then that's a real problem. There's a problem in recruiting people into the industry. It's seen as a not very attractive career. Even though the returns can be very, very, you know, pays pretty good, there's this kind of a drain of young people not going into farming as well. So our whole farming infrastructure really, or businesses is I understand it, at least in Scotland, is a problem.
I hope everybody is all right to stay around for a little bit longer. Charles, you've got your hand up.
Yes, it was just in the slide you said fundamentally carbon positive farming and land management comes down to optimizing the soil dynamics. How do you split out the land management component with the positive farming component when you're calculating the carbon footprint?
So calculating the carbon footprint is a work in progress for the sector, typically, because it's quite difficult. So there's a number of calculators. Cool Farm Tool is one. There is another that farmers use to record their land management practices and their interventions. So they'll record things like how much fuel they've used doing a process, how much fertilizer or soil conditioner they've used, what the yield has been from that crop, what the cost of the seed is, how much livestock they have, how that livestock's housed, how much energy they use on the farm, how, the lights, absolutely everything. It's quite an onerous process to capture all of those aspects that contribute to carbon and greenhouse gases.
It's just that locally, the farmers that I'm involved with that are looking at positive carbon are saying that the program will take maybe 5 years or more to implement.
Yeah.
And I get the impression from you that something is possible more quickly.
I think these speed. I think it is pretty much a 5 year window to transition to regenerative farming, and I think it might be different now. But I think a meeting I was at a couple of years ago with all sorts of stakeholders was this was the Scottish government. How is the Scottish government going to supplement farmers during that 5 year transition? And I think I don't know about speed, what's faster than other things. I think maybe cover cropping might be faster. Going to smaller animals might be faster, but all these things are still being measured and validated as well. I don't know if I've answered your question properly, but I know that there needs to be an interim support and farmers need cash support to help them in that transition period.
Yeah, we need to work with the farmers, don't we, to help them operate differently. Terry's put that in the comments. Janet's put, what sort of citizen science data would be useful for Earth observation services to buy? Would water monitoring data be an example or not?
Yeah, so there's loads of, I can't remember it now, but there is a website where there's a lot of citizen science mobile apps that invite people to, it can be regional based or it can be in general, and there's quite a few on water, so people are asked to report on anything that they see that's negative or pollution or rubbish. Flows being blocked up. For biodiversity, it's recording, well, you're probably familiar with that, different birds and things that you might observe on a nature walk. How many red kites did you see? How many of these types of flowers did you see? There's a lot of, it was again a few years ago, I'd actually rooted out all of well, not all of them, but lots of different citizen science focused applications for mobile phones that all help to contribute into that big data set that then is used by the wider science community.
We've got a comment here about Dale Vince advocating grass as an energy crop. In the chat, composted and converted to methane for fuel. And then one about Cornish farmers are experimenting with cutting edge technology in no-dig methods and solving slurry issues. It's such a huge topic, isn't it?
Yeah, and every farm will be different as well. So some farmers embrace that, I'll take this technology on and adopt this new practice, and some just don't want or are unable to. There's lots of lots of discussions around slurry and how you can minimize it, how to stop it from going into the water courses, what else you can do with slurry. There's a big program at Scottish Rural Agricultural College. It's a biorefinery and they're experimenting. They've demonstrated that from slurry you can extract the cellulose fibers and manufacture PPE equipment.
Wow.
Yeah. And they've actually done that. So, and then there's looking at slurry to generate the green hydrogen, which is the Glenstock farm. But yeah, slurry is an interesting area, and it's quite people are really looking into how it can be. What other byproducts or products you can make.
Ali just says, what was that sort of slurry spreader called? In the
I think it's a trickle spreader or something like that, but it's kind of does what it says on the tin. It allows the slurry to gently trickle and infiltrate onto the soil, rather than, I think for me, when I think of soil spreading, you think of the tractor and all of the slurry being spread in the air and then splattering on the ground behind it. They're kind of I don't know if they've been banned, but they're a no-no. They're being phased out. It needs to be gently introduced onto the soil surface. And that's what that huge big piece of kit was doing.
And Terry's put something in the chat about mentioning country file, keeping us all up to date in a friendly way, maybe. So, Rachel, this has just been absolutely amazing. We've just had a little taste, haven't we?
There's so much more.
Yes,
It really is.
I'm hoping that you're going to come back and give us the next instalment.
I'd be happy to. I think, I'm not sure, but Newcastleton, a flood project, may or may not feature on the BBC news. There's been questions asked about it. I think it's the One Show or something. So that might, but that's after we've put the sensors in the ground and we've got the data flow going. So, but I'm really, for me, I'd love to see rural communities become data providers, and because that's what it's going to take, I think, for us to really be able to mitigate some of the climate impact.
Well, thank you so much.
Welcome. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Your amazing enthusiasm, your knowledge. It's been fantastic, Rachel. Yeah. So we're going to close the meeting. Our next meeting will be one where Ian is leading us through the COP. Sorry, Mel, you've got your hand up. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, Rachael. Yeah. So I just linked in the chat. I mentioned in my breakout group,
yes,
there was a TED Talks daily that talks about how we can do our little bit for soil degradation in our own gardens, as well as the wider. So I just linked the episode there, but I thoroughly recommend TED Talks daily as a resource for things like this.
Absolutely.
A lot.
And at the top of the chat column, there's 3 little dots. If you click on that, it will enable you to save the chat, and then you can look at all this later. So our next meeting on November the 29th will be where Ian is taking us through the outcome of COP. Ian, I'm hoping that there will be some good news. Fingers crossed. Reading about the host and wanting to open up more coalfields and stuff like that. I was feeling very worried the other day, but we live in hope, don't we? I've just found out that I was planning to go on the March for Clean Water on the Sunday, the 3rd of November. There's now going to be a tube strike, so that might muck up my plans. Hopefully the tube strike might be called off, but we live in hope. But thank you, everybody. Excellent meeting. Thank you for your participation, your stuff in the chat, just coming today and sharing all of this vital information with us. And as I say, follow all the things in the chat. And Joe, I noticed that you put something about tidal water and why there's so little activity going on with tidal power, rather. That is something that we can pick up on another occasion. So thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend. Keep dry.